Hey guys, so today I'm trying out another new microphone as well as recording from my tablet instead of my phone like I normally do. The last video that I released, basically when I went to edit it, the audio didn't match up real well with the footage, and I had to adjust the audio so that it would be less off. So because of that, I thought I would try out this setup instead. And as far as video quality, I think it looks possibly even better than my phone. So this may be the way to go. A couple years back, there were at least a couple of videos that I recorded from the Mac camera, and that was significantly less high quality than my phone. And I guess I just assumed that the camera on this tablet would be the same. So yeah, I've never tried it, but yeah, to me it looks like it's actually better. Anyways, so today's video we're going to be addressing more feedback to my Smoke and Mirrors video essay, specifically the feedback I received in response to parts 3 and 4, in which I talked about when Harper appears to Juliet in the season 4 episode The Other Woman, as well as Locke's season 3 vision of Boone. If you have not seen the Smoke and Mirrors essay, at least up through those sections, I highly recommend that you watch those first before continuing on with this video, because I really don't think everything I'm going to be talking about will make much sense if you haven't already seen those. So like last time, I will go ahead and include a link to the Smoke and Mirrors playlist right here and in the description.
So this would mean that if Harper truly had died, Juliet must not have known about it. This is possible, given that Juliet had spent the past 2 weeks with the 815ers. However, it would be awfully convenient if Harper had just happened to randomly die off screen during this time. But what if it wasn't random or off screen?
I want to once again start with a comment from Time Gentleman, who says, I wonder if Harper could instead have been killed by the Man in Black in the previous 2 weeks in anticipation of this kind of situation, though that may be perhaps too much specific foresight even for him. Is it plausible that as he saw Daniel and Charlotte plus Jack and Juliet on the move, he could have nipped off to kill Harper? I really don't love the idea that the Man in Black just went and killed her and then took her form, and then we just never hear about that. Like, we never hear that Harper mysteriously died, or that people saw the monster kill her, or that she disappeared. For the monster to just be able to do that, it just feels a little too easy to me. The reason I really love the tent explosion theory that I put forth is because it not only neatly explains why we never see her again, it also explains why Juliet would not have known about her death, as well as why we never hear anybody talk about the fact that Harper died, because she died alongside so many other people from that community dying.
This team's objective was to tranquilize and transport pregnant women, and possibly all of the 815ers women had Juliet not yet marked the tents.
Wait, moving up the schedule, Juliet may not be ready. What if she hasn't had time
Then
to
we'll
identify
take all
the-
their women. And we'll sort out the ones we need later.
As a psychiatrist, Harper would be the best person besides Juliet to gauge how much tranquilizer would be safe to use on the pregnant women. And considering these 10 people would not have been able to transport about twice that many unconscious women, there was a potential scenario in which some of the women would had to have been captured and left conscious. Harper's expertise as a psychiatrist would likely have been quite valuable in such a situation, where these captives would have to be kept compliant and relatively calm.
So next I want to address a section of 2 different comments, one from Shokas and one from JulTom10630. Both of them have other points that I'm going to circle back around and address, but the thing that they both brought up is Isabel. Shokas says, One thing we agree on is that Isabel was not on the raid on the beach, which seems to be a possible theory. While JuleTom10630 said, I remember though that there were theories before that Isabel could have been one of the ones blown up, considering the producers confirmed her dead. Yeah, so I thought this was a good opportunity to share my headcanon of why Isabel also kind of disappears from the show and is never seen again after appearing in one episode. Very similarly to Harper. The reason I've never liked the idea that she was part of the beach raid team is because in the episode that she appears in, Tom seems to defer to her authority. And so for her to have participated in the beach raid but not have been in a more prominent role doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. Okay, so what do I think happened to her? Well, so we're introduced to her in the episode Stranger in a Strange Land, and after that, we never see her again. And what's worth noting about the timeline is that it is immediately after this episode that Ben would have secretly sent Tom and Richard off of the island so that Tom could recruit Michael and Richard could acquire Anthony Cooper. Now, I should add that we don't actually know that Richard was the one that abducted Anthony. The reason I tend to assume that it was Richard is because Richard is the one that Ben talks to about bringing him the man from Tallahassee, and also Anthony's description of what happened before he came to on the island. You know, he says that the last thing he remembers is being loaded into an ambulance and this man smiling at him as he put in the IV. I've always imagined that as Richard. It just sounds like Richard, like, you know, the way that he recruited Juliet and being all friendly and smiling. And yeah, I've just always imagined that it was Richard. But the point is, pretty much right after the episode Stranger in a Strange Land is when Ben would have had to send the submarine so that Tom could recruit Michael and so that somebody could have abducted Anthony Cooper. And so because of the timing of this, I also assume that Isabel left on that submarine. And I think it was also during this trip off island that the footage of Widmore beating one of Ben's men must have been acquired. And the reason that I think this footage had to have been recorded then is because Ben recorded over the Red Sox game that he showed to Jack at the beginning of season 3. So presumably this means that it was after that episode where Ben showed Jack that game. It had to have been after that the footage of Widmore beating that guy was recorded. And as we see at the end of that footage, Widmore at the very end notices that somebody's up there watching him. And so I like to think that this led to a pursuit in which at least one of Ben's people gets away with the footage, but somebody else gets caught and killed. And in my head, that was Isabel.
Juliet reasonably questions how Ben could know and communicate all of this while currently being Locke's prisoner.
Moving on to the next part of Shokasa's comment, he says, I think that if Harper's alive and communicates with Ben, then he could have had a secret walkie in the basement. But all of that seems a bit wonky to me. Like, why would Ben do all of this and pass on information to Harper, who then had to pass this information to Juliet? I think that the man in black as Harper makes more sense. So yeah, I actually completely agree that as much as we know about Ben and how much he prepares for potential situations, I too actually suspect that he had some way to communicate with his people located in that basement in case he himself was ever locked in there. In fact, I think if he were able to make contact with his people while he's locked up down there, I think that actually pretty neatly explains the shift in what Ben is trying to do in season 4. What I mean is that Ben's original plan at the end of season 3 was to head to the temple. And then once he knows the mercenary team is likely on its way, he sends Alex, Carl, and Rousseau to the temple as well. Meaning that he believes that the temple is a safer place to be than the barracks. And yet when he talks Locke into releasing him, he doesn't run off to the temple himself. And this tells me that what Ben says to John is likely true, that the reason he's not going to run off and join his people is because if they wanted him back, they would have come and rescued him. And so in my head, once Ben's locked up in that basement, he uses some secret way to communicate, perhaps a hidden walkie-talkie, and is able to make contact with Richard. And I think that Richard refused to come save Ben. And I think it was at this point that Richard made it clear that the only way they would help Ben is if he agreed to peacefully leave the island and step aside so that Locke could become the leader. And I think in that moment, Ben was not ready to accept that. And so instead, he finally agrees to tell John everything that he knows. Granted, he misrepresents some of it, but he does that in exchange for Locke releasing him and letting him stay in the camp willingly. Then you get to the point where the mercenaries attack the barracks, and Ben tells John, hey, you have to stay with me because you have to survive what's about to happen here, and they won't risk killing me.
It's very important that you survive what's about to happen here, John, so I need you to stay close to me.
And why would I do that?
Because the people that are coming won't risk hurting me. You want to live? I'm your best chance.
And when Locke asks Ben why he said that Locke has to survive what's about to happen, Ben's answer to that is that they have to go to Jacob together.
You said I need to survive this. Why?
Because there's only one person that can help us now, and that's Jacob, and we have to go to him together.
Which I suppose makes some sense if, Ben has never seen Jacob and Ben believes that Locke heard Jacob when they went to the cabin together. But I think what makes more sense is that Ben knows at this point that if he needs at some point his people or his former people to save him from the mercenaries, the only way that they're going to do that is if he allows Locke to peacefully take over the leadership role. And so I think the real reason that Ben insists that Locke stay with him and not risk getting killed is because he really needs Locke alive if he's ever going to get his people to help him. And then after Alex is killed and Ben, suddenly has this real thirst for vengeance against Widmore, I've talked about in the past why at the end of season 4, Ben is very willing to leave the island and step aside for Locke. There are a lot of reasons by that point that Ben is willing to do that. And one of them is that he wants to find Widmore and tell him, hey, I'm going to get revenge on you by killing your daughter. And so as we get to the season 4 finale, that's when Ben signals to one of his people, and I believe communicates that he is now willing to accept the terms Richard laid out for what they would need in order to come help him. So yeah, all of that's to say, I do agree that Ben probably had a way to communicate with his people when he was locked up in the barracks. But as Shokas said, and as I went into in the video, there are so many other things about what Harper says to Juliet about, why she's there and why she's asking Juliet to do these things. It's not so much the idea that Ben was able to contact the others. That's so far down on the list of things that don't make sense about what Harper says to Juliet.
But if this is the Man in Black, how has he taken Harper's form? Considering the fact that neither Juliet nor Jack seem in any way mentally impaired in this scene, it seems undeniable that this is a completely corporeal, physically present manifestation. And that would mean Harper must be dead by this point in time. The issue with this is that Juliet's reaction does not seem to indicate she believed Harper to be dead.
But okay, the last part of Shokasa's comment that I want to address says, I agree that if Harper died, then Juliet doesn't know about it. But I think that it could have happened off-screen as well. Perhaps Harper became depressed and took her own life after the death of Goodwin. Or, being more and more furious with Ben for Goodwin's death, perhaps she planned or attempted to kill Ben and Ben killed her instead, with no one witnessing it. Yeah, so again, there's nothing that says that that couldn't have happened. There's nothing about that interpretation or having that headcanon that I would say is wrong. I just personally find it more interesting and more satisfying to think that we actually did see her death on screen and that Juliet actually interacted with her body without her knowing it. And that this is something that the Man in Black was then able to take advantage of.
But why would Ben have trusted Juliet, who had just committed the ultimate betrayal a couple days earlier, with such a mission, the failure of which could mean the death of everyone on the island? Or, at the very least, the loss of one of his few remaining defenses against the looming threat of the mercenaries.
Whatever he's doing, tell him to stop. We're trying to disable it before he can use it against us!
And now I want to get back to JewelTom10630's comment where he says, the Tempest gas thing overall is quite mysterious. It's sad we only saw the station in one episode, but we can assume Widmore was afraid of it and was very well aware of the gas, so he knew where to send Faraday and Charlotte on their mission almost as their first objective when landing. Considering Goodwin worked there, it would seem that the others still had some plans with the gas. So yes, I thought this was a great opportunity to go over Widmore and the freighter team's plan as I see it. And the first thing I think to note is that we need to remember that Charles Widmore is the one that ordered the purge and therefore would have been very well aware of how it was executed. So yes, he would indeed be aware of the gas and its ability to kill everyone on the island. As for why Goodwin would have been maintaining the station and the gas, I think this was specifically in case Ben ever needed to use it again if Widmore were to infiltrate the island. And so when Widmore sends the freighter, there are two main teams. There's the science team and then there's the mercenary team. But also prior to that, there's Naomi by herself. And in the episode Meet Kevin Johnson, I think if you pay attention to what Lapidus and her are arguing about, you can hear her tell Frank that she's going first, whether he likes it or not. And he asks for what? And she says, that's need to know, and you don't.
Sorry, Frank. I'm going first, and that's all there is to it.
No offense, but I was flying these things when you were still in grade school. If anybody's got to go first, it should be me.
Yeah, I need you here to transport the science team, Frank.
What the hell are you going to be doing?
That's need to know. You don't.
And so what this tells us is that as the freighter approached the coordinates that they were given for the location of the island, when that happened, that's when Naomi got in her helicopter and went looking for the island. But it also seems to tell us that she planned on landing on the island and accomplishing something on her own. I was going to be coy about this and save what I was going to say for my upcoming video on Widmore, but yeah, I think that would probably be unsatisfying right now. So basically, I think what her first mission was to discreetly arrive on the island and find Desmond. Remember that she has that picture of Desmond with Penny.
Hey, I'm going to ask you one last time. Why was Naomi carrying this picture of me?
Look, man, you got to understand something. She was senior management. It's not like we hung around the cafeteria together.
If you guys have seen and remember the video I've already done on Widmore, you know that I kind of end it by, postulating that Widmore was knowingly or unknowingly doing the bidding of the Man in Black. And it's the Man in Black that, first of all, wants all of the candidates dead, but second of all, needs someone who is resistant to the electromagnetic energy to be able to go down to the source and deactivate it. And that person, the only person still living that we know of that is resistant like that, is Desmond. So while the Man in Black would have wanted the freighter sent to the island specifically to torch it and kill everyone on it, aside from Ben, who Widmore wants alive. And so while the Man in Black would want all of that, he would also want to make sure that Desmond wasn't killed along with them. And I'll save the specifics for, how Widmore would have come to the conclusion that he needed to keep Desmond alive. I'll save that for the Widmore video. But the point is that I think the first thing Naomi was supposed to do was discreetly infiltrate the island, find Desmond, and get him off the island. At which point Frank would have flown in Miles, whose job it was to locate Ben in advance of the mercenary team so that he could tell the mercenary team where to find him, while Faraday and Charlotte's mission was to go to the Tempest and deactivate the gas. Because as I've already said, I think the gas was being maintained as a defense against a potential incursion on the island. And I think Widmore would have obviously deduced this. And so once Faraday and Charlotte deactivate the gas, that's when the mercenary team gets the green light to go to the island. And if everything had gone to plan, Naomi would have been the one to fly them to the island. Obviously, because Naomi gets killed, that's when the mercenaries have to force Frank to be the one to fly them back and forth. But we can still tell that the plan was for the mercenary team to wait until the gas was neutralized. Because Faraday succeeds at neutralizing it at the end of the 6th episode, and then at the very beginning of the 7th episode, is when we see Kimi on deck with Frank telling him not to be late. And later in that episode, Saeed sees that the helicopter's gone and is asking where it went. And then, the rest of the plan was essentially the mercenary team goes to get Ben. And once they secured Ben alive, once they had him safe and out of the crossfire, then I think their mission was to kill everyone else on the island. The first we hear that this is their mission obviously comes from Ben, who is, a questionable source. But the thing I keep pointing to as evidence that this actually was their plan, it's after finding out that Ben had a spy on the boat who must have learned things about them and about their mission that Kimi says the line, "If Linus knows that we plan to torch the island, then there's only one place he can go."
I have you in my custody, and I promise you that no one else in that house will be harmed.
You and I both know that once you have me, there's nothing to stop you from killing everybody else on this island.
What kind of guy do you think I am?
Martin Christopher Kimi, former First Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, served with distinction from 1996 to 2001. But since then, you've worked with a number of mercenary organizations, specifically in Uganda. So I know exactly what kind of man you are, Mr. Kimi, and we can dispense with the formalities.
Okay, Ben. You got it.
And if Linus knows that we're going to torch the island, there's only one place that he can go.
So yet again, I must insist that this means that they were always planning on torching the island. This whole plan of Widmore's and of the freighter team, or of the mercenary team, this is another aspect of the show where it's never explicitly laid out for us, but I think the pieces are all there for us to fit together. And when we actually, do that, we can come to a pretty satisfying understanding of the way things played out.
Add in the fact that Harper instantly appears and disappears to the sound of the whispers.
Jack?
Which, as we've repeatedly discussed, very often accompany confirmed appearances of the monster, makes it seem certain that this is the Man in Black.
I just told her where the people you're looking for are headed. Maybe you and your gun can go too.
The last comment that I want to address in regards to part 3 also has multiple parts I want to address. And this comment comes from Engine CD, who asks, so the whispers aren't necessary here? So yeah, what Engine CD is referring to is the previous video essay I did about my interpretation of what the whispers are. And hopefully if you're watching this, you've seen that already, because I think I make the case for my interpretation pretty well, whereas me just saying what my interpretation is, as I'm about to say, may not seem as plausible to you without hearing the full case. But essentially, I think the whispers are the sounds of thoughts, memories, consciousness that the monster generates, specifically when he is projecting forms away from his corporeal self. I think this is a side effect of him doing that, but I do think it's one that he can regulate. And indeed, I think he can intentionally generate that sound if he wants to. And so yes, in the Harper example, I think that the monster is intentionally creating the sound of the whispers to make Harper's initial appearance seem more eerie and worth heeding. And then at the end of the scene, he generates them again so that she can suddenly disappear.
This would have provided the Man in Black, with his recently gained insight into Juliet's mind, the perfect opportunity to manipulate her into killing at least 2 people, and potentially everyone else on the island in the process.
Moving on to the other part of Engine CD's comment that I want to talk about, they say, the Man in Black scanned her in Season 3 and must have gained knowledge of her and Goodwin's affairs and how her mind works. And maybe no one could guilt trip her into becoming loyal to the others again, but the Man in Black must have felt that having an affair with Goodwin made her more likely to listen to Harper's request/order. So their point there is that when the monster scans Juliet in Season 3, that gives him all of the insight into how her mind works and how to manipulate her, and that's how he knows that appearing as Harper and saying what he says is something that would get Juliet to do what he wants her to do. And I completely agree, but I would add some observations there. The flashbacks of this episode, The Other Woman, the episode in which Harper shows up to Juliet, those flashbacks basically tell the story of how Ben got Goodwin killed because of his jealousy and his possessiveness over Juliet. This is something that Harper warns Juliet about prior to the crash of 815, that, she wants Juliet to stop seeing Goodwin, because if she doesn't, then Harper's afraid of what Ben will do. Juliet doesn't seem to take this as seriously. Well, I guess she does, because she talks to Goodwin about it. Goodwin's kind of the one that doesn't take it too seriously. But the point is, the way that story, the flashback story ends is, with Goodwin having been killed because of Ben's manipulations. And so what these flashbacks and this story is telling us is, or it's showing us just how much Juliet not only understands that Ben is a master manipulator, but also how much she fears that fact. And so when what appears to be Harper shows up to her, after Juliet has recently turned against Ben and foiled some of his plans, for this vision of Harper to appear in this moment at this time and claim to Juliet that, oh, this is all part of Ben's plan. Like, he's exactly where he wants to be. He's fully well aware of what's going on different parts of the island. Like, he even knows in the moment that Faraday and Charlotte are going and doing this thing. For Harper to be the one telling Juliet all this, and convincing Juliet of this, that, I think, makes Juliet feel like, okay, yeah, even after I did all of these things and chose to turn against Ben, like, it didn't matter. Like, he's still got this plan going on, and there's just no outthinking this guy or outmaneuvering this guy. So I guess I better do what he's telling me to do. And I think the present day conclusion to Juliet's story further illustrates that that's what's going on with her. You know, she came this close to killing Faraday and Charlotte, and then when she realizes that that would have been a mistake and that could have gotten everybody killed, you know, she goes outside and talks to Jack, and she kind of expresses this apprehension that she's been having, that, you know, these people have come to wage war on Ben, but Ben's gonna win. And, you know, when that happens, you know, people I care about that Ben would be jealous of shouldn't be around me. And again, I think that illustrates why she follows what she is told are Ben's orders, even though she recently turned against him. And so bringing all of that back around to this being just another great example of, again, in my opinion and in my interpretation, it's a great example of the monster or the man in black reading someone's mind and understanding psychologically how they work and figuring out exactly what buttons to push to get them to do what he wants. So that was everything I wanted to address in regards to part 3. So now we're moving on to part 4.
The story of John Locke, as I see it, is in large part a cautionary tale about the perils of extreme faith. His desperation to feel chosen was so immense that he never stopped to question what it was he had been chosen for.
I'm here because I was chosen to be. That's absolutely right.
His faith was so blind that he failed to see just how sinister this path he was being led down truly was. And he allowed his longing for meaning and importance to be exploited until it literally killed him.
User SF5909 says, I do love Locke and truly believe he did have a deep connection to the island. He was special, and his actions were deemed justifiable in the end, like a true martyr, yet he was manipulated over and over, which is why his story is a tragedy. So, first of all, I would personally disagree that some of his actions are justifiable, even if in the end, you know, they lead to certain things. I don't think that, in my opinion, you really can't make murder, like outright murder, justifiable. So yeah, I wouldn't exactly agree with that statement. But that said, I too actually am a big fan of Locke as a character. I think that there's another layer to that character, one that I don't really talk about in this video essay, or I really don't talk about it a whole lot in general. In this video essay, I talked about the layer of John's story, which is tragic and in which, yeah, he is just somebody that keeps falling for these cons. Basically, that's the layer of his story where he is wrong. But I think there is another layer in which he is right. In these debates that Locke and Jack have throughout the series, there are a lot of things, or a lot of points that Locke is making to Jack that are correct. Even though he is very wrong about so many things, and he doesn't question some of the ways in which he's being led down certain paths, he is right for having faith in them being there for a reason, in not only himself being important in the grand scheme of things, but the other 815ers being important as well. Basically, I think a lot of the specifics of what Jack and Locke are saying to each other, I think in a lot of ways neither of them fully knows what they're talking about. And yet the underlying beliefs, specifically in Locke's case, they are no less true. Essentially, I think the faith that Locke demonstrates in itself is admirable. But it's the way that he allows that faith to be so easily exploited without really questioning the morality of what he's being asked to sacrifice or do. That's the stuff that makes him a cautionary tale. But yes, in the end, it is Locke that gets Jack to accept and acknowledge the part of himself that is also a man of faith. Locke says all the way back at the end of season 1 that Jack does believe in fate. He just doesn't know it yet. And that's because Jack isn't willing to, I guess, accept that he doesn't have as much control over himself and his life as he likes to believe that he does. That's a thing we know about Jack, is that he has to be in control. And so for Jack to consciously acknowledge that he believes in fate would be him having to reckon with how little control he actually has. But in the end, Locke is the one that is able to convince Jack, and Jack in the final season does become a man of faith, specifically because of Locke. Jack himself even acknowledges this several times to the Man in Black, and it is because Jack becomes a man of faith that he is able to defeat the Man in Black. And therefore, Locke and his faith directly led to the monster's defeat. And so, yes, I would agree with anyone that would call Locke a hero. I just think that he's an extremely flawed hero who we could not only learn positive things from, but we can also learn what not to do.
In the climactic flashback scene of the season 3 episode Further Instructions, we see Locke's character perfectly summarized in 3 simple words: amenable for coercion.
Did you know it would be me? What? In the truck? Did you know it would be me driving? Did they choose me?
Yeah. They chose you, John.
Why?
Because you hadn't been here long, didn't have a criminal record, and the psych profile said you would be amenable for coercion.
Amenable for coercion?
Hey! Lower the gun, John.
Next, I want to talk about an observation from Time Gentleman, who says, "One thing I don't think I'd noticed before is that when Locke asks Eddie if he knew it would be him driving, Eddie says, 'Yeah, they chose you, John,' which is a nice echoing of Locke repeatedly being told he's the chosen one by people who are looking to manipulate him." Yes, I think this is a great observation, and the thing that I really like about that scene and about that moment that Time Gentleman's talking about is that, you know, Locke is trying to find out if the police chose him to infiltrate this community and basically work against John's interest. But when Eddie says the line, "Yes, they chose you, John," John can't help but smile a little before he asks why.
Yeah. They chose you, John.
Why?
Like, just hearing somebody tell him that he was chosen for something makes him smile, before he actually, in this case, does question why that was.
By the end of the episode, John is confused by the way things played out.
I've done everything you wanted me to do, so why did you do this to me?
But we, the audience, were being brilliantly clued in to what was happening on the island, by what this same episode's flashbacks were showing us. In these flashbacks, we see Locke put his faith in someone who is merely deceiving and exploiting him for their own selfish ends.
This was meant to be.
This stuff isn't meant to be, even though it may feel that way. That this probably won't have a happy ending.
And yet neither John nor most of us made the connection that the same thing was happening again in his present.
But you and I are here for a reason. There's something that we were meant to find. Something that's going to help us get into the hatch. I know it.
And just like with Deus Ex Machina in Season 1, I believe what was happening in this episode's flashbacks were once again cleverly communicating to us what was happening on Island as well. In both cases, someone familiar with John's psych profile is deceiving and manipulating him because they know he is amenable for coercion.
And the last comment that I want to address in today's video comes from Taylor Bullock 9729, who asks, don't the dreams and visions help move the characters toward the series of events that end up defeating the Man in Black, though? If the Man in Black had the power to infiltrate dreams, etc., wouldn't he have tried to move things a different way? So, yeah, that's technically true, in the way that it's true that every event that happens in the series leads to the Man in Black being defeated, including the things we know for a fact the Man in Black did. The Man in Black killing Sun and Jin, or even more recently than that, the Man in Black sending Desmond down into the cave to deactivate the source, that very directly leads to him being killed. But we know the Man in Black made that choice to serve his agenda. So while technically, yes, I agree with what Taylor Bullock says, technically, in the grand scheme of things, the dreams and visions did eventually lead to the Man in Black's defeat. I think that in no way means that it wasn't the Man in Black behind them, that he didn't instigate these things to serve his own agenda and to lead to the events he was trying to get them to lead to. And for the reasons that I've laid out so far, and some reasons that I still have yet to lay out but will be soon, I do think that it makes a lot more sense that the Man in Black is behind these dreams and apparitions. Just, as an example, as a more obvious example that I have already addressed, is the Horace Goodspeed dream, where, that dream leads Locke to the cabin where Christian is waiting for him to tell him to do certain things, all of which we know the Man in Black is the one asking him to do and wants to get done and wants to lead to certain things. In my opinion, it's undeniable that the Man in Black can infiltrate dreams. Even if there are certain on-screen dreams that are more open to interpretation, whether or not he was behind them or involved with them, I think it's absolutely established that this is something he is capable of doing. But okay, I think that's everything I have for today. I will have one more of these follow-ups in the immediate future for the Smoke and Mirrors essay, and that one will cover the remaining 3 sections, as well as some feedback I received on Reddit regarding this channel and these videos specifically, or more generally. Once again, if you guys have not seen the entirety of the Smoke and Mirrors video essay, the link to that playlist is in the description. So please do use that, and I hope you come back for the next one.
Oh, you're still here. Hopefully that means you enjoyed this video. If so, please consider sticking around and being a constant for this channel by clicking right up here to subscribe. And don't forget to hit the bell icon if you would like to be notified when more videos like this one arrive. In the meantime, feel free to check out previous content from this channel by clicking here or here. Oh no. Please subscribe.